Well, thanks, Spencer. It's great to be here with you guys. I don't know how much you guys know about me, or if I'm your congressman and therefore you're my boss. But I thought I'd start with a little bit of who I am and then talk about what's going on. I actually got to be the very first doctor to go into Baghdad. I inserted with the Navy SEAL team, the SEAL Team 6 actually. And when I went into Baghdad, my first task, if you will, was to find a vehicle that we could use as an ambulance in the event that any of the guys got wounded. I could throw them in the back and take them wherever they needed to go. And so I saw this Nissan pickup truck and I thought, man, this will be perfect. So I go over to the Nissan pickup truck, I rip open the steering column, and I started hot wiring the truck. Now, I'm not a criminal. They teach you this stuff in special operations. If you saw the movie Black Hawk Down, I was Delta Force's doctor. I was Delta Force and SEAL Team 6's doctor. So I'm just about to get this vehicle started, and this guy with a huge beard comes up, and he grabs me, he pulls me physically out of the truck. And a quick show of hands, anybody here ever gotten caught stealing a car? I thought I was a dead man, but he quickly told me the agency of our government that he worked for and that he'd already stolen that truck. That was his truck. So I'm moping away thinking I've got to tell a SEAL team commander I failed in my mission. I guess the guy felt sorry for me and he said, hey, wait a minute, buddy, down at the end of the runway, there's a powder blue Nissan Maxima and it has the keys in the ignition. So I hoof it down there. Sure enough, there's the car. Hop in, hit the keys, nothing happened. Lift the hood, someone had stolen the battery. So again, I'm thinking, how do I tell a SEAL Team 6 squadron commander that I failed to find a vehicle? And as I'm walking back, I pass that Nissan truck. And I'm thinking, Nissan truck, Nissan Maxima. Look left, look right, no agency guy around. So I stole the battery right out of it. It went right in the Maxima. It was a perfect fit. I drove in, SEAL team commander gets in the car, mission successful. Unfortunately, the story doesn't end there. Several months later, I'm in the Post Exchange, which is like a Dollar General that travels around the battlefield for soldiers to buy things. I'm in the checkout line, and in walked that bearded agency dude. And he recognizes me. He makes a beeline straight to me, pokes his finger in my chest and says, hey, buddy, did you take my battery that night we came into Baghdad? And I said, yes, sir, I'm a thief, but not a liar. I took your battery. He said, no worries. I had taken that battery out of the Nissan Maxima. I sent you down to go get it. And I never saw the guy again. But again, it's great to be with you tonight. And my story started on a dirt road in Mississippi. I grew up fairly poor. My father lost his arm when I was in first grade. And the company he worked for, this was pre-ADA, so the company he worked for said, you're half a man, we're going to pay you half a salary. My dad was a foreman on a paper machine. And so Dad wouldn't accept government assistance, wouldn't take handouts from others. So my one-armed father roofed houses on the weekends. He would literally scale the ladder, and I became his right arm. He would start every nail with the palm of his hand. Then he would drive the nail. And we would literally roof houses on the weekends just to make ends meet. Couldn't go to, college on his dime. So I applied for West Point and went to the military academy. I got a degree in economics, graduated from there, served as an Army Ranger infantry officer for about 9 years. And my dad and my story are really like this. Dad almost dies again. His esophagus ruptured. He's on the vent for 42 days in the ICU. The doc who took care of him had been an Army field artillery officer whom the Army sent to medical school and on to become a doctor in the Army. And I realized, wait a minute, there's this program out there. And so I went to the Army and said, will you send me to med school? They said yes, and so off to med school I went. Midlife crisis, I guess. I get through med school, I'm in an ER residency, 9/11 happens. And I see some young faces, so maybe you don't remember where you were when the towers fell. I see some other folks who probably do remember. But imagine being a major in the United States Army Medical Corps, an ex-Army Ranger, you see the towers come down, you know what's going to happen. You're going to war. And so within 2 days of the towers fall, I get a call. Hey, are you the ex-Army Ranger now in ER doc? Yeah, that's me. There's a plane ticket in your mailbox. So I fly to Fort Campbell, Kentucky, and I interviewed to be the doctor for the Night Stalkers. Get the job, and that's how I met my most infamous patient. I actually interviewed Saddam Hussein the night we caught him, and it was unbelievable. I mean, imagine training with an elite team to do something that's so rare in history, the capture of a totalitarian dictator who killed well over 1 million people. To be a part of that and then to interview him that night, the historical, precedent, the power of the moment, I mean, it was overwhelming, the emotions. And here I am with Saddam. And I think, and I'll tell a story about that here in a moment, but it was incredible. I get out of the Army, and I leave the military as an ER physician to start my own healthcare company. I felt there was a better way to deliver emergency medical care. The models were very physician and healthcare care provider centric, and I thought they needed to be patient centric. And so I started a company, and within 8 years, we were doing about $212 million in revenue annually, and we had 52 contracts, 52 hospitals that we were running their ERs in 11 states in just 8 years. Never lost a contract. And my turnover in an industry that had a turnover of about 18%, because an ER physician's a clock worker. They punch a clock and they go home. They don't have to keep a patient base. So they travel a lot. They move around. Our turnover was less than 2%. And usually the people who left, we asked them to leave. How we did that was I took what I had learned from my father and in special operations and in the military and in West Point, and I applied it to my business. And I want to talk a little bit about this today because most everyone in the room are business folks. And then I want to talk about why that is needed in our country. My parents used to tell me the whole parables of Matthew 25. My dad became a pastor eventually after I left high school. But we were pretty religious. And that parable is about, that chapter of the Bible is about 3 parables. And the first one, the moral of the story is you can't rely on other people to do it for you, okay? There were 10 brides and the grooms, and 5 were prepared and 5 didn't. 5 had oil for the ceremony and 5 didn't. And the 5 who didn't went to get theirs in the middle right before the grooms came, and they missed the whole wedding. So you can't rely, and they asked for the others to share, but they couldn't because they needed theirs. You can't rely on somebody else to do it. You got to be prepared yourself. The next parable is about someone who says there are 3 people, here's 10 talents, and it was the coin of the realm, but interestingly enough, it converts to English talent, ability, capability, gift. Here's 10, here's 5, here's 1. The person who got 10 went and produced a return of 10 more and brought 20 back. 5 more, brought 10 back. 1 was scared. So they buried it in the ground, didn't produce a return on the investment from the talent that had been given. So always be prepared to use the gifts and abilities you've been given to return an investment. And then the last story is about a group of people. And it's actually, bear with me, I'm sharing my faith experience, but it's about the end times and Judgment Day. And so the master of this group divides the 2. One is the sheep, one is the goat. Says to the sheep, when I was hungry, you fed me. When I was naked, you clothed me. When I was in jail, you came and visited me. And they're like, when did we do this to you? And he said, well, when you did it to everybody else, you did it to me. And so the figure is God saying that, right? Says to these guys, you didn't come see me in jail. You didn't provide clothing when I was naked. You didn't help me. And the point is that God connects himself to his people so much that to serve them is to serve him, right? That's the fascinating thing about this parable. So you have to always be prepared. You can't rely on somebody else to use your gifts and abilities to return an investment in the lives of people. And so that's what my parents taught me. So took that into the military where you have to function as a team, and the team is more important than the individual. And that's where I learned this motto that became the cultural statement for my company. And it's the title of a book that will be coming out this fall. We before me. When the organization, when the team, when the mission matters more than you do as the individual. My parents would teach me, in a small town, Your reputation impacts all of us. In the Army, you're doing your job means we all live. And when I flew into Baghdad, sewn into my cap was the motto, we before me. So if you came as an ER physician to work for my company, you signed a statement saying you would live by we before me culture, or you didn't get a job. And it detailed what that looked like. If you want, you can have a great vision for your company. But if you don't have a culture that will make it happen, it's just never going to happen. Everything is about culture. I've heard it said, culture eats, strategy for lunch or something like that. I think I don't know who said it, but it's a great quote. It's actually very true. And so it's all about culture. The culture, is there a we before me culture? Is it, are you going to cover me when I need shifts covered? Am I going to show up late and make sure I call you before I show up half an hour late to let you know I'm coming, but I'm just running late? All these different things that define what your culture is. Because remember this, if you aim at nothing, you will hit it every time. In your organization, in your family, and in your personal life, if you aim at nothing, you will hit it every time. Nothing. So, what's the culture on the wall for your company? And you ask, well, how is that so? Why is it so important to have a great culture? Well, when I reported to the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, at that point in my lifetime, I had graduated from West Point, graduated from the University of Southern California with a master's in information systems, economics undergrad. I was in the top of my med school class. I had gone through Ranger School. I had commanded in the elite 82nd Airborne Division as an infantry officer, and I wondered in my head if I was good enough to be there. How many people come to work at your place wondering if they're good enough to be on your team? How many of them are saying, I have got to fight to stay on this team because this is the best there is? That's the power of culture. And it will captivate people if you get it right. Great book, Tribal Leadership, talks about the 5 levels of culture. If you haven't read it, man, read it. It's fantastic. Well, I'm running my company, running a not-for-profit. We had a not-for-profit, Two Rivers Medical Foundation. We ran a free healthcare clinic in Clarksville. We ran a free healthcare clinic in the Hood in Memphis. We did medical mission trips all over the world. I mean, it was awesome. And Ron Ramsey, the Lieutenant Governor of Tennessee, comes to me and says, would you run for politics? And I'm like, I don't want to be in politics. Talk about a place with no culture. And so I go back to West Point for my 25th reunion in the interim of that ask and me deciding. And I go to West Point and I'm at my reunion, 25th reunion. And the guy was, I think, a year behind me, or I think he was a year behind me. He was a 1-star general at this point. Now he's the commandant of cadets, and he's briefing how West Point has changed in the past 25 years. But at the end of his presentation, he puts up a slide, and he says, this hasn't changed. The mission of West Point remains to train leaders for a lifetime of service to the country. And I was like, ugh. I took taxpayer dollars to go to a school whose purpose was to serve the nation with their lifetime. Oh, man. So I walk up onto the plane at West Point. If you've never been, I encourage you to go. This is where Benedict Arnold betrayed the Continental Army, gave the plans for West Point. It's fascinating. The battles that were fought there for our nation's freedom. It's really cool. The cannon are still there. The chain that they stretched across the river to block the British ships. Patton has walked there, MacArthur, Grant, all these incredible leaders in our nation. And on the plane is where the cadets parade. And for us, it's kind of like holy ground. And on the corner is the statue of Douglas MacArthur, and a quote that I had to memorize as a cadet. So I walk from this briefing up to MacArthur's statue on the plane, and I see the quote. Duty, honor, country. Those 3 hallowed words reverently dictate what you can be, what you ought to be, what you will be. and the word duty wouldn't get out of my head. So I walk around the other side of the plane, call Ron Ramsey and say, okay, I'll run for the state Senate. And I did. I won. And served 6 years in the Tennessee State Senate. My two big claim to, I got a ton of bills through, but the ones I'm probably the most proud of, my Teacher's Bill of Rights. It's 10 Bill of Rights for teachers, safe environment, all these different things that teachers will be given. The one that was the most impactful was, if you used to pay the Hall income tax and you don't now, that was my bill. And it's fascinating because it was a tax on interest and dividend income, right? And Tennessee had this asterisk by its name. Income tax-free with an asterisk that said down at the bottom, oh, unless, you invest, right? You're going to pay taxes if you invest. You're going to pay a dividend tax. Well, we repealed that. And only twice in the nation's history has a state ever repealed any form of an income tax, Alaska and now Tennessee. We were 38th in the nation for best place to retire. Kiplinger's quickly, a week or two later, moved us to 4th. So I feel pretty good about that. Marsha Blackburn decides not to run for re-election and to run for the U.S. Senate. She calls me and says, hey, you're running? I said, okay. Ran for Congress, and I've been here 6 years. I currently sit as the chairman of the Committee on Homeland Security. So the border falls under my purview, from funding, oversight, and law. And we've written laws, we've done oversight, and we've funded. Also is the cyber border, which may touch some of you guys. If you have cyber security, that falls into CISA. And oh, by the way, on July the 1st, we're bringing the director of CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, to Nashville, Vanderbilt, to do a conference with business leaders about how to protect your companies better. There'll be 2 town halls, one with her on business and banking, the other's healthcare. And if you're following what's happened to Ascension, you know the need for that one, okay? And many, many other things. And I'm also on foreign affairs because I just love national security and I love the concepts of that. I think the greatest divide in the country, I'll talk about this and then we'll open it up for questions, or the greatest challenge to America is the divide in the country. I think this ideologic shift where the parties have kind of gone like this puts us in a difficult place. And I recognized it as soon as I got to Congress, and so I said, I'm going to do something differently. I'm a conservative Republican, but I listen. And so I said, let's do this. Let's form. The problem was the rhetoric is so bad and the relationships aren't there. And so I started what I call the Reagan-O'Neill Club. And I invited 8 Democrats and 8 Republicans. And I said, you can't talk policy. In fact, I've said, no, we don't talk about that here. You just get to know what the other person's story is. Have a relationship. And maybe with relationship, we can dial the rhetoric down. And I remember as COVID hit, our meetings had to end for a while. We tried to start it back up after COVID. It stuttered for a little bit. And I was on a congressional delegation with a group of Democrats, 3 Republicans. The Democrats were sitting here. The Republicans were sitting here. We'd go to dinner. The Democrats would sit over here. The Republicans would sit over here. Like, man, I'm on a bus the next day. The Democrats are in the front. The Republicans are in the back. And I heard one of the Democrats say something that made me really angry. But I got to thinking, wait a minute, 760,000 Americans sent her to that office. And if I'm angry with her, I'm really angry with them. I can't do that. I took an oath to die for this country. I'm going to get past this. So I went up and sat next to Lori Trahan from Massachusetts. And I just started asking her about her family. Mother of 5, married to a contractor who builds houses, helps the American dream come true for people. She'd been a staffer, Hall of Fame volleyball player at Georgetown, staffer on the Hill, rose to being chief of staff for a Massachusetts congressman, went back, started a successful consulting business, and then ran for Congress and won. And I was like, I respect, you know? I mean, we don't agree on the issues, but Lori and I are great friends now. And she started coming to Reagan-O'Neill. It's 30 and 30 now. And we're having the next one, the 13th of June at my house, the basement. There'll be plenty of Tennessee whiskey and bourbon. They won't talk politics, and we'll just have relationships. And I can't tell you how much that's benefited us. And we got a long way to go to fix this divide. But I really believe if Americans are united, there is nothing that can stop us. The China issue, the Ukraine issue, the Israel-Hamas issue, the economy, the challenges that are before us, the border, we'll fix it all if we can just come together. Because when Americans come together, nobody can stop us. And so that's probably, I hope, one of my biggest legacies in Congress, despite being the guy who led the first impeachment of a sitting cabinet secretary. I mean, that's a historical thing, but honestly, I hope Reagan O'Neill's my biggest legacy. We'll see. We before me. If we all live that in regard to the country and put the whole over our own stuff, maybe we save it. Maybe we save it. Well, with that, I'll take your questions. Thank you.
See, isn't he good? I mean, that's like authenticity, really good. So we just arranged the Trump verdict to come out 20 minutes prior to him coming here. This was all part of the plan. So I talked to the congressman and prep for this just like 15 minutes before he started speaking and said, listen, there could be any number of questions that come here. And he said, you don't get to where he's at not being able to answer any type of questions for anybody, anywhere, and that is the vision for this. So please feel free to ask any questions that you would like. That's the design here, is to be able to learn and be educated and to really get value from this evening. So I'll ask the first question, and then you can just call on people as
Sure.
as they go through. So you are clearly a leader. You've been a leader in business. You've been a leader in the military, a leader in elected office. When I think about being in Congress, you're one of 435.
Yeah.
And there has to be an element to where you're one of 435 really important people in a United States of almost 400 million. But you're also one of 435, at which case for someone that is a leader through and through, there has to be an element to it that's a little maddening, right? Because one vote sometimes swings things in the House, but not often. How have you personally wrestled through that as you clearly have a heart for this nation, but sometimes run up against spots where you kind of have to say, I can't do anything more?
Yeah. Well, it's a great question because I get it all the time. Why can't you fix X or why can't you fix Y? And well, I'm one of 435 votes. Plus, a lot of people don't understand. Those who are concerned about border security and what's happening there will say, why can't Congress do something? Well, Congress doesn't have a military that we can send. That's the executive branch. And so there's some misunderstanding there. So that can be frustrating too. But I try to be a ship's captain and not a lighthouse. The lighthouse and there are some congressmen, congresswomen who, that's their goal, is to be a lighthouse, and they want to shine, on the rocks, but they don't want to negotiate. An aircraft carrier doesn't negotiate with a lighthouse. It's immovable, right? And we have lots of Congress people like that. I want to be the ship's captain. I want to get the ship into harbor. So, being a person who will sit down and listen and negotiate and say, okay, I really want this, but I'll settle for this, and has produced an opportunity for me to have influence on both sides of the aisle. I mean, when the speaker's race came up, I had probably 15 Democrats call me and say, would you please run? I took that as a pretty big compliment. Despite being, I'm in a conservative district. If you look at this district, it's pretty conservative. And so I represent my district, and I'm fairly conservative. But it gives you influence because you're willing to work with people, and because you build relationships, and you put, I used to look at again, if I can tell a faith story, there's this story of it's Sunday, and the disciples in Christ are walking through this corn or grain field, And you're not supposed to pick grain on Sunday or something. You know, that was the rule. But they were really hungry, so they did. And the religious leaders of the time start pouncing on them for breaking the rule. And Christ basically says, look, people are more important, you know? And so let them eat, you know? And I think that, you know, tells me that sometimes you got to just do what's right, maybe, and not what's necessarily right, but do what's right. And so I try to weigh all of this, and I think it's given me influence. You know, you have to go back 70 years to find someone who's gotten a full committee in just 2 terms. So I feel like I've been rewarded with that opportunity to have a greater influence because of the fact that I'm just willing. I really want to be a ship's captain and not a lighthouse. So I guess you just raise your hand and I'll call on you. And oh, by the way, what I really said to Spencer back there was, if any politician's unwilling to answer the hard questions or take the hard questions, they don't deserve the job. So I might say here tonight, I'm sorry, I disagree with you. And most of the people in the district disagree with you. I might say that. But if we get there and we can have the conversation, that's still good. So. Yes, sir. All the way in the back, Sean.
Dr. Green, yeah. So how do you square up being a team player with the party when you have a gut feeling, a heartfelt feeling that maybe you want to go a different route with that decision? I'm sure it's specific to whatever the issue is at hand, but how do you try to square that up? Party politics and being a follower with being a leader in your own heart and making right.
I try to change it before we have to vote, right? I go to them and say, look, we got to fix this, or I'm going to be a no. And by the way, I got 30 others that are going to be no's because they're listening to me. Sometimes that works, sometimes that doesn't, and I have to vote no, even for party stuff. I mean, I've voted against the party on several things, just recently, in fact. So you just do your best to get the needle moved a little. And if they move it a little, maybe I'll vote for it. If they move it enough, I'll vote for it. In the end, I have to represent this district. I have voted what I knew the district would want when I probably would have voted differently. Not often. That rarely happens. But and I got my black and whites, right? I mean, there are some things that I would just resign the job if the district wanted me to vote X and my value system doesn't allow me to. I just resign and get out of the job. So far that hasn't happened. But I just try to change it from on the front end, and if we don't, then I'll vote no. The problem, we've allowed our emotions just to get into this so much, and it's controlling this rhetoric and Now, I just try to remain as unemotional about it as I can and do what I think is right.
You talked about unifying. We could be a unifier. Do you think it's possible that the pathway forward would be to divide for Tennessee to succeed?
Wait, what do you mean?
Do you think the pathway forward would be division and Tennessee exercise its sovereignty?
Well, I hope not, because you look at China and what? Huh?
We're not really the United States. We're very divided.
We
so
are.
At some point in time, we have an honest discussion and say, we are not the same. And maybe we should move with our values. Could it
get to that? I suppose so, but I don't want that because, look, I mean, China already has us 4-1 on the population. If their per capita GDP gets to ours, they will be the hegemon in the world, and they want something different than we want. They are using slave labor amongst the Uyghurs to manufacture products. They're forced sterilizing people. They're harvesting organs from people who believe differently than the Communist Party. That's not who we need as the hegemon of the world. I mean, despite our mistakes and foibles through the years, I think we're the best country to be the superpower of the world. I really do. I believe that. I'm going next week to stand on the beaches of Normandy for the 80th anniversary of D-Day invasion, where 9,800 crosses and stars of David are planted where America went and fought for freedom in Europe and then spent billions of dollars to rebuild them with the Marshall Plan. I think we're better to be the leader than China. I think we're better than to be to have Russia lead the world. And honestly, taking China on, we got to be united. Otherwise, if we divide, can I see that? Maybe? I mean, clearly we're dividing. There's no doubt about that. Now, you're talking about actually seceding, I think.
Well, for Tennessee to be propping up Washington State or Portland, Oregon, I mean, in a way, there's a redistribution of our taxation to those other states.
We're actually a net negative. I mean, we actually take more from the federal government as a state than we send to there in Texas. Just FYI. But yeah, I mean, I surely I don't want for Tennessee the stuff that happens in those states here, right? I mean, the economic policies, some of the social stuff, I don't think Tennesseans want that. So far, we've been able to, I think, separate from that stuff. Honestly, that's why I think federalism is the solution. If we can get back to let states be states, we can keep the union together. And I think it's essential to do that. But I carried an American flag into combat with me. It's going to be real hard for me to get to a point where, could I get there? Yeah, maybe.
To see that America sanctioned Texas in January, when Texas makes the decision to protect the border, you see the United States government come against its people to sanction Texas.
Yeah, that's ridiculous.
As a Tennessean, it's like, man, at what point do we declare sovereignty and autonomy and unify?
See, I think you can do that now without seceding. I think the federal government should be sued on a lot of different issues. And the states need to fight for their rights. You may have heard that I was getting out of Congress for a little bit. And the statement I made was very intentional. It's time to come back to Tennessee because it's time for the states to fight. The fight is between us and Washington, not inside Washington, because it is. I'll agree with you. But we can do that, and we should try first by exerting our sovereignty in the Constitution with the 10th Amendment in the courts, and let's try that.
Thank you so much for coming out.
Yeah.
My name is Tyler. I wish my dad was here too. He's a veteran as well. He's actually at his 50th reunion for the Air Force Academy.
Oh, awesome. 50th. Wow. My 40th is coming up, so.
His graduation was today, and he was actually able to commission a few squadrons, so that was a big deal for him. But kind of the lead before me topic as well, the conversation that my dad and I have right now consistently is just everything is so expensive. And it's just, I didn't know if you could just talk a little bit about the economy, and there's just kind of just where I think everybody in this room can feel it's just like a big problem that we're having is everything at the grocery store is expensive, cars are expensive,
Inflation.
Travel is expensive. And I mean, it's just, I have a good job. I've got 2 little girls and a wife, and it's just, and some things, we're having, it's a struggle, and that's a conversation that I worry about at my age, where my dad is aging, then I'm probably gonna have to take care of him, and also having 2 little girls as well that I'm taking care of as well. I'm kind of stuck in the middle of like, gosh, where,
So inflation. Let's talk about the economy. Lori, who I said was my Democrat friend, we were sitting on the floor of the House, and she said, "Who understands inflation anyway?" I said, "Well, I think a high school econ student probably does." It's very simple. If you have a fixed amount of goods in an economy and you put more money into the economy, you'll have more dollars chasing a fixed amount of goods, and you will get the price of those goods to go up. The impact of all this profligate spending from Washington has been, and I, by the way, have voted no on those budgets, but anyway, so profligate spending, infrastructure bill, Green New Deal, all this trillions of dollars has resulted in massive inflation to the tune of $9,000 per Tennessean per year extra out of their pocket just to pay for the basics. Food is 26% in this administration increase. Now layer into that an impact on the supply of particularly oil and gas. Now I get it. There are people who are concerned about the environment. But we have basically waged a war on our oil and gas industry. And that loaf of bread you eat comes from grain that was plowed and harvested with a tractor that ran on diesel. If you say to the oil and gas company, oh, by the way, we'll give you the permits because that's politically sounds good in the press and we caught a lot of heat because of it, but we're going to give you the permits, but we're not going to give you the seismic approvals to do the seismic studies. Nobody's mining oil and gas. You shut down the pipelines. You do everything they've done is to shut down oil and gas in the United States, which is fascinating if you're really worried about the environment because we're 47% cleaner than anybody else on the planet. And if you really want to protect the environment, we'd put them out of business. And we'd crank our oil and gas up. But if you assault the oil and gas industry and you spend a lot of money, you're going to get massive inflation. Well, what's happening now? Well, what's happening now is China has seen an opportunity. So they're dumping the U.S. treasuries. They're forming this BRICS central bank digital currency. And those countries in the BRICS are dumping their dollars as well. So now you see the demand for the dollar as a reserve currency plummeting. The value of the dollar. As if 85, and this is a true story, 85% of what we consume is made outside the United States, which we have to buy in someone else's currency. So if the value of the dollar falls anymore, we're going to see massive inflation increasing. Now, before that happens fully, we've got another little problem. The Fed. The Fed came in and raised the rates. They kept them too low for too long, and then they raised them like this, the fastest increase in the interest rates in the history of the country. Net interest margin, the difference between what they are earning from loans and what they have to pay for deposits, is now massive. Negative. For the country, the banking industry as a whole is losing $500 million a day on the gap, they call it. Because 20-year mortgages, 30-year mortgages are at 2-3% from years ago. And now to get deposits, they're having to pay 5%, 4.5%, 5%. We had 7 banks fail last week. We got 12 on the chopping block. Jamie Dimon yesterday says the economy is going to crash before Christmas. Crash. The 20-year Fed, or the 20-year T-bill and our Treasury and the 30-year Treasury, last 2 auctions, no one has shown up to buy it. We're screwed. And it's because of bad decision making that an Econ 101 student could tell us, stop spending so much money. Stop waging war on oil and gas, one of the best. I mean, get it. We got to work to protect the environment, make a transition. That's fine. But we got to have energy. You don't get bread if you don't harvest the grain. And oh, by the way, if you put sanctions on Russia, I get what Russia's doing, but those sanctions scared the BRICS countries, and they don't want us dictating to them, so they're dumping the dollar. Sorry to paint a really bad picture, but that's where we are. And the only way to fix it is to find a way to stimulate growth at the same time, you're cutting government spending. And if we don't do that, we're done. How do we buy tanks? You know, you talk about this competition from China. We buy it with tax dollars. That's how we build a tank and an aircraft carrier and all that stuff. If your GDP is going down, if you are expensing everything and don't get any tax revenue, then boom, and I'm not suggesting increasing taxes at all because I believe firmly in the Laffer curve. But I mean, we're in a bad place, and we have to get government spending under control. If you go back to, it's very interesting. Newt Gingrich was the Speaker of the House and had his contract with America. Remember that, 10 items, and Bill Clinton was the president. And a lot of people don't realize this. Republicans don't, especially. Bill Clinton cut taxes, right? Cut taxes, and Newt Gingrich stopped the spending. And together, Those worked. Laffer curve, right? Everybody, some of you know the Laffer curve, right? It worked. And with cut spending, we had a surplus. It's the last time we've had a surplus. If we don't get back to that, yes, sir.
Yeah, in my opinion, we have a major security issue with our southern border. What leverage, if any, does Congress have to get the Senate to take up H.R. 2?
That's a great question, and it's an informed question, and thank you for knowing about H.R. 2. H.R. 2 is the bill that I passed, myself and Jim Jordan. We did it through both of our committees. He's Judiciary, so he had the immigration piece. I had the border security piece. We merged them on the floor. It became House Resolution 2. We passed it on the floor. It sits in the Senate languishing. It would have compelled the federal government to secure the border if they adhered to the law, which we've seen is a problem, right? So what leverage do we have? That's your question.
Yeah.
Well, the courts, the states that sued, and someone brought up Texas. Texas sued Biden, went all the way to the Supreme Court because all the levels below sided with Texas. It gets to the Supreme Court. They make argument about what can you do when a cabinet secretary refuses to enforce the law, which in this case, we're a co-equal branch of government. We write the laws, they execute the laws. Interestingly enough, Iran-Contra, Nixon impeachment, all of those said, whether it was Democrat or Republican, the executive branch doesn't get to pick and choose which laws they're going to enforce. They have to enforce the laws as written by Congress. That's the foundation of the government. Let's spread power out. Let's not put power in the hands of a king. Let's spread power out. And if we spread power out, we'll get freedom, right? That's the basic principle of America. And so in this lawsuit, before the Supreme Court, the Solicitor General, arguing on behalf of Biden, says, the states don't have standing to make this argument. And Kavanaugh says, so what you're telling me is, if I get this correct, is the only people who have standing is Congress through its extra powers to either zero the budget or to impeach. And the Solicitor General said, well, if you've got a lawless cabinet secretary, that's probably the only recourse is for Congress to act. So we scratch our heads over on the Homeland Security Committee and we say, well, if we cut the budget, well, that's not going to get us border security. We've got a lawless cabinet secretary who sent a memorandum to the people in the Department of Homeland Security and said, I know what the law says, that if you get someone at the border who has a felony conviction in the country they're coming from, you're supposed to detain them. And he said, that's not a reason to detain. Send them into the country. And 48,000 felons have just been released into the United States. So we said, wait a minute, you can't have a cabinet secretary who just picks and chooses why have a Congress in the first place? This has to be a high crime. So I took a 10-month investigation and a few weeks ago walked the impeachment articles for the first sitting cabinet secretary in the history of the country to the Senate. And the Senate chose not to let the argument be heard. Now let me frame what's going on at the border for those of you who aren't paying attention. 10 million people have been allowed into the country in the last 3.5 years. 10 million. Tennessee is the 16th largest state and our population is 7 million. 2 million of those people were never even interviewed. They're called what's called known gotaways, meaning the Border Patrol agent has 15 people here he's trying to get signed into a system and he looks out the corner of his eye and he catches 8 people going by. He can't get to them. So he reports 8 gotaways. We don't know who they are. Director Ray comes before my committee in the worldwide threats briefing and I say to him, that 2 million known gotaways, not the other thousands that we never even see, which we do see them on video cameras and things like that. But can you assure to me there isn't a Hamas terrorist cell in that group? And he said, no, Congressman, Chairman, I can't. So you can't guarantee me that in those 2 million people there isn't a Hamas terrorist or a Hezbollah terrorist. I said, no. And guess what? 2 Jordanians just tried to drive a truck and they were released across at the southern border, encountered, released into the country, into Quantico, were stopped. And I can tell you, I can't tell you the number that's classified, but we have captured, The FBI task forces are doing a great job. They're finding a lot of these people. Afghani terrorists, Hezbollah terrorists, Hamas terrorists, they've all been caught inside the country and sent to ICE detention like these Jordanians are. But we don't know what we don't know. The southern border is the greatest national security threat to the country, period. And we can't get the president or Mr. Mayorkas, even after impeaching him, to do anything about it. And he's willfully subverting the laws passed by Congress. It's a choice he's making, clearly. But that's who's in office now. Another concern about the southern border that I want to inform folks on if you're not paying attention to this. In the last 18 months, 50,000 Chinese nationals have come into the country. If you go 20 years before that, the highest number was 1,800 in a year. Suddenly 50,000 have come in the last 18 months, many of whom served in the People's Liberation Army. And Mr. Mayorkas and his policies are just releasing them into the country. Now, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but I am a military-trained strategy thinker. I also know what Russia did in Ukraine. They sent people over. They became migrants. They moved into the country. They set up, and then they became saboteurs in the invasion. Xi Jinping's not an idiot. They're very smart. And I can go over China's strategy if you want me to. But 50,000 of them sitting in the country right now is not a good thing. The Chinese spy balloon, the Chinese police stations, the multiple times, 100 incursions on our military installations from Chinese tourists with cameras. We just let 50,000 come in. Yeah, the southern border is our greatest national security threat. And it is a willful decision by the current administration. Yes, ma'am.
So you say it's common sense, some of these decisions economically or common sense about letting these people into our country. What do you think is the motivation for these people to make decisions that hurt us? What is it coming from? That they don't believe America should be great or exceptional in the world? They're okay because as long as my life's all right, I've got money, I'm okay, and I don't care about the rest of the country. I don't understand why decisions are made.
I don't understand the border. Yeah, I don't understand the border. I'll give you some reasons here in just a second, but let me further expound on just those costs, right? 200,000 dead to fentanyl, human trafficking, child exploitation. They had 80,000 unaccompanied children. You know, you saw these images from, Trump put kids in cages. That actually was from Obama's presidency, by the way. But there's this accusation, and they put 80,000 into a system and can't find them now. And those 80,000 children, like 40 of them went to one family in Austin, Texas. Who knows where those people are? In Tennessee, just last week, they caught a van load of girls less than 14 years old being taken from the border to be human trafficked, basically sex trade. They're letting all of this happen. So you ask the question, why? Why would they do that? And I scratch my head and I go, what could it be? What could it be? They can't really want the death of America. I mean, I have some ideas, but one of those ideas is it's about the census. The census shifts the number of people in Congress, and it shifts the power in the Congress. And if you move a lot of people, and the vast majority of the people who are being bused from the border, interestingly enough, not by Texas. Texas' little busing thing does about 3% of the total that get bused. 97% are paid for by your taxpayer dollars to be moved throughout the country, either with a plane flight or a bus trip. And the vast majority are going to blue cities. Chicago is screaming. New York, this is going to destroy New York. That's a Democrat mayor. Next year in New York, it's going to cost them $12 billion. So, but what it does is they count these guys in the Senate, or in the census, and that gives those blue cities more seats in Congress. So if I were to say, why would they allow the death, the crime, all of these other things happen? Well, it's a net benefit for power. That would be the speculative. I don't have, a listening device inside their planning meetings. But that's the only upside I can see, other than perhaps just the potential to create chaos, which justifies, how many of you have read Hobbes? You know who Hobbes is, the political philosopher right after the Civil War in England, 1500s, I believe. The Leviathan is the famous political philosophy book that he wrote. He talks about how people will trade their freedom for security. And we've even done it in America. When a hurricane hits, we'll tolerate martial law in order to, make sure everybody's safe. So we trade our freedom for security. But we kind of did it in COVID, right? So we traded our freedom for security there. If you create enough chaos, again, I'm not saying this is exactly what it is, but if I were sort of taking this down the rabbit hole, if I create chaos, then I can justify authoritarianism. Now, that's a bold statement, I know, and I'm not saying that's exactly where we are. But we got chaos in the economy. We got chaos at the southern border. We got chaos in the world. Look, Vladimir Putin decided to invade Ukraine when Joe Biden left American citizens in Afghanistan. And when I had dinner with Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister of England, America's greatest ally. We have bled with those guys all over the planet trying to bring freedom. And I said, Prime Minister, he sat right next to me, I said, Prime Minister, I want to ask you to verify if a rumor I've heard is really true. Did you ask Joe Biden to have the American forces stay just 5 more days so that all the Brits could be safely taken out of Afghanistan? And he said no. And he goes, I can remember where I was. I called the president. I said, hey, I need 5 more days. And Joe Biden told me no. Now, this is our greatest ally. They went to Afghanistan and died in Afghanistan because we were attacked on 9/11, and Joe Biden left them hanging. And you tell me Vladimir Putin didn't go, hell, I can invade Ukraine. Chaos in the economy, chaos at the border, chaos in the world, China licking its lips for Taiwan. Hamas killed thousands on October the 7th. If you extrapolate those dead to their population and our population, it would be as if 50,000 Americans died in a day to a terrorist attack. And yet Joe Biden is the one who said, as soon as he got in office, yeah, let's cut another deal with Iran on the nuclear deal. Hey, let's take the Houthi rebels off the terrorist watch list. We want to be buddies with these guys. Oh, by the way, here's $5 billion if you'll give 5 people back. Oh, Iran props up and funds Hamas. And the oil sanctions, we're going to take them off so you can go from, 2 or 3 billion a year in revenue to 30 billion a year in revenue. This totalitarian state, which killed American soldiers in Iraq, is killing them in Iraq and Syria now. And just the other day, he said, no, Israel, you can't continue this war and take out the leadership of Hamas in Rafah. We're going to stop the weapons, the precision-guided weapons, mind you, the smart bombs that actually prevent the death of casualties, civilian casualties. We're going to keep those from you. It boggles the mind. Now I understand your question.
I was doing a little research, because I was asking the same question of why is this being done? I had this conversation with Senator Blackburn, just the same thing of just why in the world. And there was some numbers that the congressman just gave that it helped me understand it a little bit, is that each congressional district, the 435 congressional representatives that we have, it takes about 800,000 people to be able to get a congressional district. So if you end up being able to have, right now in Congress, the division is one seat. One seat is the difference between the majority and being in the minority. And if you end up being able to get 8 million people, which is a conservative estimate of how many have come across the border.
That would be a conservative estimate.
That's 10 seats in Congress. And the hope being that for those that come across the border, that there may be loyalty to a party that allowed that to happen.
Even if they don't vote, though, it alters the census because Trump tried to stop counting non-citizens and lost that in the courts, right? So they're counting non-citizens in the census, and then they get more blue seats, solidly blue seats. Sort of gerrymandered to death.
Yeah. I'll do this, and then maybe we'll have like 2 last questions. You have time to be able to do that.
Yeah.
So I do want to say this.
I'm enjoying it.
For Congressman Green, he's too kind to do this in front of the group, but I really do want to emphasize. I spend a lot of my time standing up in front of people in the business world, telling them how to deploy their capital, to invest in the FedEx world, to invest in bread routes in a lot of different ways. And so I just do want to say, because it's important, Congressman Green is in a re-election campaign. To the extent that you at any point in time feel compelled to be able to support him, what I hope tonight, whether you're just supporting with your vote or whether you support with money, know that it's going to a place where you can see his heart here on display, right? You can see his passion rise up on issues that he cares. And that's exactly why I've just been really thankful to have you here tonight. And so just know, to the extent that you do give, you're giving alongside my money as well, because I really do appreciate supporting Congressman Green. So let's do maybe 2 last questions, and then we'll wrap it up.
I can stick
and be
around for a
sensitive to your
drink
time.
too if somebody wants a one-on-one.
Yeah, that's good. So we'll do 2 more, and then we'll get out of here.
Sure.
So, with unity being what you perceive as the greatest threat, is there, one of the things I struggle with envisioning is there a world where in November either outcome gets us any closer to that? And on a timeline perspective, my friends and colleagues in the room would know, they would laughably call me a doomsday prepper, or maybe not a conspiracy theorist, but maybe willing to dabble there at times. So, like, is there a timeline that you could see that this stuff is recoverable, or do you feel like we're on some sort of sprint to a cliff of?
I talk about how we got here in my book that's coming out, and it's a combination of things. It's not disagreeing. I think it's okay for us to have differences of opinion. The problem is that we're hating the other people because they think differently than we do. Right. And maybe some people should, they deserve that, I guess. But the vast majority of people don't, right? And so, how we got here was, I think it started with texting. My kids would sit in the back seat and they would text, sitting next to one another. I'm like, can't you just talk to one another? But they would text things to people because it's not face-to-face. Maybe they shouldn't have. And then social media came in and exploded that. And if you really want to see some hateful stuff, go read my Facebook page. Go read any politicians, either side, right? This is not a right or left phenomenon. Yeah. And it's just, you would never say that to someone's face. And there's again, I go back to my faith, there's this thing in Corinthians, which is a letter Paul wrote to the church in Corinthians, St. Paul. He writes to them and he talks about how the conscience gets torn down when you violate your conscience. And it becomes easier and easier to do the wrong thing. And we might think of that, you're teaching to your kid, you never quit because then it becomes easier to quit. Well, you never do the wrong thing because then it becomes easier to do the wrong thing. That's the point of that. And as this stuff happened in Facebook and social media, it got to a point now where we're yelling at each other face to face because that conscience has been brought down about how you treat someone else. And so here we are in this place, and it's going to take a heart change. I mean, we want to fix this. It's really going to take a heart change. And it's going to take a heart change that says, you know what? If we want to fix it, we have to start loving people again. We have to start loving each other and appreciating each other and agreeing to disagree. and still being okay with it. And if we can't get there, maybe the first question I got tonight is the answer. But it's my hope. It's what I'm working toward. But it's really in here. Yes, ma'am.
So my brother-in-law was the commandant of the Marine Corps.
And right now?
No, during Obama and, Bush and Obama.
Okay.
So, but he's still involved. And one of the things that he's very concerned about is the new military strategy. And he's talked to us a little bit about it for the Marine Corps. And they've, you hear a lot of things about how they're changing their emphasis. Then you hear things in the news about electric tanks. I don't know if this is true. You can help me out. But it sounds like we're more concerned about secondary issues, making them primary in the military instead of focus on being a lethal military force. And so that's a real concern. And then when you say we've got 50,000 Chinese military-age men walking across the border that could follow the same strategy that you saw previously in Ukraine, what are your thoughts on all that?
I think there has been a huge misdirection recently from the Pentagon. There was then, there is now. Look, the Pentagon exists for one reason, and that is to kill our enemies, or to be so lethal that the enemies never, they're sort of like we keep them, this force in a can, ready, our glass, break glass when necessary kind of thing. And we got to get back to having a warrior ethos at the Pentagon. I agree 100%. Someone asked me today, what would you do if you were Secretary of Defense? I said, the first thing I'd do is identify every 3-star general who's afraid to send an email until a lawyer reads it. We need to get back to a warrior ethos. We've got to get back to, quite honestly, and this will sound a little bit grotesque, but to people who are willing to stab a bayonet in the enemy's face.
What's a deterrence?
Correct. I mean, the goal is deterrence, right? But I will tell you that overmatch, when I went to war, and I went in 2002, was my first trip to Iraq, the fall of Iraq. And the overmatch between us and the bad guys was such that, we went through the Iraqi military like, as Patton would say, crap through a goose. Remember that speech, the famous Patton speech, if you ever saw the movie? It's a great speech. Just watch the speech at the beginning. But so now, though, overmatch is not, China has some capability. We just found out that Volt Typhoon, a bunch of Chinese hackers have been in our infrastructure for 5 years. The Iranians actually hacked multiple water treatment facilities in multiple states. We're not at parity, but we're really close. And here we've got a military that's focused on stuff that doesn't really matter toward winning the war. And we got to get a warrior ethos back at the Pentagon. So I agree with you. I think there are some steps that can be taken. Hopefully something can change here soon, but we'll see.
Thank you.
Thanks, brother.